Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis, where we like to explore that fascinating link between creativity and mental illness.
Oh, such a rich area, isn't it?
It is. It always sparks such great conversations.
Mm-hmm.
For today's deep dive, we're turning our attention to ADHD 2.0.
Oh, a classic. A great choice.
It's by Dr. Edward Hallowell, a psychiatrist who I think brings a really unique perspective because he himself has ADHD.
That's always so valuable to hear from someone who's, been there.
Absolutely. And to kind of pull you in right from the start, I wanted to share this story from the book about a young boy, Samuel, who Dr. Hallowell met in Shanghai.
Okay.
Samuel was struggling with ADHD, which at the time wasn't really widely understood in his culture.
Right, yeah. I can imagine that added an extra layer of difficulty.
Absolutely. It created all these challenges, and Dr. Hallowell decided to take this really compassionate approach. He used this mix of traditional and I guess you could call them non-traditional therapies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he worked with Samuel's parents to help them understand his behavior, encourage this whole idea of positive reinforcement, and then he introduced some unusual exercises.
Oh, like what?
Things like balancing and juggling.
Balancing and juggling.
Yeah. To stimulate Samuel's cerebellum.
Wait, hold on. Cerebellar stimulation? I mean, I'm familiar with those activities for balance and coordination, but what does that have to do with ADHD?
That's what I thought was so fascinating. It turns out that the cerebellum plays a much bigger role in cognitive and emotional control than we previously thought.
I did not know that.
And get this, Samuel's behavior, it improved dramatically. His academic performance, it soared, and he was able to manage his ADHD symptoms much, much better.
Wow, that's incredible. It just shows you the power of, really understanding the brain and how a combination of approaches can make a real difference.
It really does. And
Yeah.
this story kind of leads into this bigger theme that ADHD 2.0 explores the evolving understanding of ADHD.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating how our perception of ADHD has shifted over time. We're finally starting to see that it's not just a childhood condition.
Mm-hmm.
It can impact adults in some really profound ways.
That's so true. And the book actually talks about this concept of adult onset ADHD,
right.
where it can be triggered when the demands of life kind of exceed our coping mechanisms.
Which, let's face it, happens to a lot of us.
All the time, especially in today's world. It's so fast-paced, it's hyper-stimulating. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information.
Yeah, no wonder people are struggling with focus, attention, executive function, all of it.
Exactly. And Dr. Hallowell, he actually suggests that ADHD might be way more prevalent than we realize, potentially affecting more than that estimated 5% of the population who actually have a formal diagnosis.
Interesting. So it's possible there are many people out there who have it but don't even know it.
Exactly. And he introduces this concept of, get ready for it, a variable attention stimulus trait.
Okay.
VS,
Okay.
which describes this spectrum of ADHD-like characteristics.
Oh,
So are we all a little ADHD then?
well, not necessarily. It's more like, these ADHD traits, they exist on a continuum. And in today's world, with all these distractions, it's easy to see how those traits could become, more noticeable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. It makes you wonder if we're all adapting to this environment in ways we don't even really understand.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see that ADHD is a lot more complex than maybe we initially thought.
Definitely.
But what about the link between ADHD and creativity?
Right.
That's a big part of why we're doing this deep dive.
It is. It's a fascinating connection.
It is.
And one of the key takeaways from ADHD 2.0 is that the ADHD brain, it's wired differently, and this wiring can be both, a source of challenges and strengths.
Oh, absolutely. I love that.
And Dr. Hallowell actually uses this really cool analogy to describe the core ADHD personality.
What's that?
He calls it the lunatic, the lover, and the poet.
Oh, I love that. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So the lunatic represents that potential for intense negative thoughts, mood swings, difficulty regulating emotions. This can come out as anxiety, impulsivity, or even those what-if disaster scenarios that just keep playing in your head.
I think everyone can relate to those sometimes, but I imagine it's a lot more intense with ADHD.
Definitely. And then you have the lover side, which embodies that passionate, enthusiastic energy that a lot of people with ADHD have.
Right.
They get super engaged, super absorbed in their interests. It's like they're head over heels in love with an idea.
And they bring that energy to everything they do.
Exactly. And then finally, you have the poet, which really captures that imaginative, innovative side of ADHD.
Ah, the creative spark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People with ADHD often think outside the box, see connections that others miss. They bring fresh perspectives to problems.
It's like this incredible potential for creativity just waiting to be unleashed.
It really is.
But I'm curious, how does the ADHD brain actually work differently? Like, what's going on neurologically?
Well, ADHD 2.0 actually delves into the neuroscience behind these traits,
Okay.
specifically the interplay between two key brain networks.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So these networks are called the task positive network, or TPN for short.
Okay.
And then you have the default mode network, which is DMN.
All right, break it down for us.
So the TPN, that's active when we're focused on a specific task, right?
Yeah.
Like writing an email or solving a math problem.
Right,
It
yeah.
helps us direct our attention, stay organized, follow through with goals.
So that's like the get stuff done part of our brain.
Exactly. Now, the DMN, this one's active when our mind is wandering, daydreaming,
Yeah.
reflecting on ourselves and our experiences.
Okay.
So it's involved in creativity, self-awareness, making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas.
So the DMN is more like that brainstorming or big picture part of the brain.
You got it. And in neurotypical brains, there's this smooth switch between these two networks. Allows for focused work, but also mental downtime.
Makes sense.
But in the ADHD brain, this switch, it can be a little glitchy.
Okay.
Leading to those challenges with concentration, organization, and even emotional regulation.
So someone with ADHD might be trying to focus on a task, but their DMN keeps interrupting, pulling them into this whirlwind of thoughts.
That's a great way to put it. And then on the other hand, they might get so caught up in that DMN world that they struggle to switch back to the TPN.
Right, and actually focus on what they need to get done.
Exactly.
Which kind of explains why people with ADHD can be both incredibly creative and easily distracted.
Exactly. It's like a double-edged sword.
It is. And you know what? The book has this really funny example of this with Dr. Ratey's Uncle Ron and this whole plant shopping adventure.
Yeah, yes, Uncle Ron. It's the perfect illustration of what happens when that DMN takes over.
So for our listeners, let me set the scene. Uncle Ron goes to the hardware store with his wife. They're going to pick up some plants and supplies.
Right, a simple errand.
Exactly. But he dives headfirst into the gardening section.
Of course he does.
He's completely engrossed in his vision for this perfect springtime yard.
He's picking out flowers, planning the layout, picturing it all.
And totally forgets his wife is even there.
Oh, no.
Hours later, she finds him still in the garden center.
Yeah.
She's totally lost in his own world.
Poor woman. I bet she was not happy.
Not at all. It's both funny and a little bit sad.
It is.
But it shows how the ADHD brain can just fixate on a detail and lose track of the bigger picture.
It's not intentional. It's just how their brains work.
And this leads to another important point that ADHD 2.0 makes. These aren't character flaws. These are differences in brain wiring.
Exactly. Understanding that can be so freeing.
It's about understanding, not judging.
Absolutely. And ADHD 2.0 goes beyond just explaining the problem. It also offers potential solutions.
Okay, like what?
Well, one of the more unexpected ones is this connection to the cerebellum.
Oh, right. We mentioned that earlier with Samuel's story.
Exactly. That's not just about balance and coordination.
Right. I mean, that's what I always thought.
Yeah. For a long time, that's all it was thought to do.
Right.
But there's this groundbreaking research by Dr. Schmaumann suggesting that the cerebellum, it actually plays a much bigger role
Okay, I'm listening.
in cognitive and emotional control.
Really?
Yeah. And his research shows that people with cerebellar injuries, they often experience issues that mirror ADHD symptoms.
Like what?
Things like problems with executive function, emotional regulation, even spatial awareness.
Wow. So you're saying that strengthening the cerebellum could actually help with ADHD.
That's the exciting possibility.
That's amazing.
And this is where those cerebellar stimulation exercises we talked about, like the balancing, the juggling, they come in.
Wow. I never would have guessed that something as simple as standing on one leg could potentially impact ADHD.
Right. It's like physical therapy for the brain.
I love that.
And ADHD 2.0 highlights all sorts of programs and techniques that utilize this approach, like the Bell-Gal Balance Board, the Zing Performance Program.
Amazing. It really opens up a whole new avenue for managing ADHD.
It does.
So we're seeing how understanding this unique wiring of the ADHD brain opens up all these new possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
But what about actually harnessing that creative potential?
Right, right. It's where the concept of finding your right difficult comes in.
Finding your right difficult. I like that.
Yeah, ADHD 2.0 really emphasizes focusing on strengths, not just weaknesses.
So instead of trying to force ourselves to fit into a mold that doesn't work, we should be looking for challenges that actually spark our passion and play to our natural abilities.
That's exactly it. And the book gives this wonderful example of a guy named Alan, who is basically a serial entrepreneur from a young age.
I love entrepreneur stories.
Yeah.
Tell me more about Alan.
So as a teenager, Alan saw a business opportunity in, wait for it, wrong number calls.
Wrong number calls.
Yeah.
How is that a business opportunity?
Well, he was getting so many wrong numbers for this local rug cleaning company
Okay.
that he started offering to clean their rugs himself at a lower price, of course.
Wow. What a creative way to turn a nuisance into a venture.
Right. And this was just the beginning. That experience led him to all sorts of ventures, from cleaning film equipment to removing asbestos.
Oh, wow.
He was constantly seeking out new challenges, learning new skills, and finding success by tapping into his problem-solving abilities.
That's so inspiring. It just shows that ADHD can be this incredible wellspring of ingenuity when it's channeled in the right direction.
Exactly. It's not about fixing ADHD. It's about making it work for you.
That's a great message.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about understanding the ADHD brain, the potential of cerebellar stimulation, and the power of finding your right difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the role of environment?
Oh, the environment's huge. ADHD 2.0 dedicates a whole chapter to it.
Really?
Yeah, it covers everything. Structure, nutrition, sleep, positive connections.
So it's about creating the supportive environment where the ADHD brain can actually thrive.
Exactly. And the book gives tons of practical tips and strategies for doing just that, for both adults and children.
Well, let's dive into some of those practical tips when we come back.
So before we went to that break, we were talking about this stellar environment.
Right. Creating one to support the ADHD brain.
Exactly. And I'm really eager to dive into those practical tips from ADHD 2.0 because who couldn't use a little help with that?
Seriously.
Yeah.
My environment could definitely use some work. So what kind of advice does the book offer?
Oh, it's surprisingly comprehensive. It covers everything from structure to nutrition to sleep to social connections. You name it, it's in there.
Well, let's start with structure, because I think that's a big one for a lot of people, myself included. Organizing and managing time?
Mm-hmm.
It could be a struggle.
Oh, for sure. It's a common challenge. And the book actually delves into how the ADHD brain experiences time differently.
Differently how?
Well, for a lot of people with ADHD, it's less about like seconds ticking by and more about now versus not now.
So a deadline that's 5 days away might as well be 5 months away.
Exactly. And this can lead to procrastination, missed deadlines, just a whole lot of stress.
Oh, I've been there. So what can people do about it?
Well, the book suggests using external reminders, things like alarms, visual cues, even having someone else hold you accountable. Those can make a big difference in bridging that gap in time perception.
That makes sense. What about for kids with ADHD? How can parents create a structured environment that actually works?
For kids, ADHD 2.0 really stresses those consistent routines, clear expectations, and a designated space for homework or other activities.
So predictability and boundaries are key.
Yeah, but it's not about being rigid. The book also emphasizes unstructured playtime, where kids can explore, move their bodies, let their imaginations run wild.
Right. Play is so important, especially for kids with all that energy and creativity.
It is. It's about finding that balance, structure and freedom.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered structure. What about nutrition? Is there like a specific ADHD diet?
Well, not one magic diet.
Okay.
But ADHD 2.0 does discuss the potential impact of food on ADHD symptoms, especially for kids. Some might have sensitivities to certain ingredients.
It's interesting. What kind of things should parents be aware of?
The book talks about the Feingold diet, which cuts out artificial food colorings, flavorings, preservatives, things like that.
Okay.
It might not work for everyone, but it does highlight that connection between what we eat and how our brains work.
Right. The gut-brain connection. You hear so much about it these days.
You do. And the book also mentions the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, found in fish, flax seeds, walnuts, for brain health.
So eating for brain health is a key part of creating that stellar environment.
It is. Along with getting enough sleep, the book really hammers that home as well.
Sleep, oh yeah. That's what I'm always working on.
Me too. But it's especially crucial for folks with ADHD.
Because I imagine sleep deprivation just makes everything worse, right?
It does. It can really exacerbate those ADHD symptoms.
Yeah.
Makes it even harder to focus, regulate emotions, function at your best.
Ugh, yeah, I can definitely see that.
Definitely.
So we've covered structure, nutrition, and sleep. What about the people in our lives? How do we cultivate positive social connections that actually support our well-being, especially for dealing with ADHD or VASD?
Oh, that's such a huge piece of the puzzle. And ADHD 2.0 emphasizes surrounding yourself with supportive people.
Right, people who get you.
People who get you, who appreciate your strengths, help you navigate those challenges. It's like having your own personal cheer squad.
It is. And it's not just about receiving support, right? It's also about being a source of support for others.
Exactly. Contributing to your community, helping others can be incredibly fulfilling, creates a sense of purpose.
And that can be really powerful for someone with ADHD, right?
Absolutely. ADHD 2.0 also talks about, focusing on those strengths, finding work that aligns with your natural abilities.
So creating a life that works with your brain, not against it.
Exactly. And that includes seeking professional help when you need it. And speaking of professional help, ADHD 2.0 actually dedicates a good chunk to discussing medication, addressing those common concerns, misconceptions.
Because medication can be a controversial topic, right? I'm really curious what the book has to say about it.
Well, it emphasizes that medication isn't a magic bullet,
Right.
but it can be a valuable tool,
Yeah.
especially when combined with therapy, those lifestyle changes we've been talking about, and a supportive environment.
So again, it's this multifaceted approach, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. And for folks who are considering medication, the book actually breaks down the different types, starting with, the most common stimulants.
Stimulant.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people raise eyebrows at that.
I get it. It seems counterintuitive, right, to give someone with an overactive brain a stimulant.
Right.
But it's key to remember that stimulants for ADHD, they work by targeting specific neurotransmitters in the brain.
Dopamine and norepinephrine, right?
Exactly. Those are the ones involved in regulating attention, focus, executive function. And in individuals with ADHD, these systems are often out of whack. So stimulants essentially help to boost these systems, leading to improvements in concentration, impulse control, all that good stuff.
So it's not about making the brain more stimulated generally, but rather fine-tuning those specific chemical pathways.
Exactly. And the book actually lists out the various stimulant meds available, methylphenidate-based ones like Ritalin and Concerta, and amphetamine-based ones like Adderall and Vivance.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. And that's why ADHD 2.0 emphasizes, working closely with a healthcare professional.
Oh, right.
Someone who can assess your individual needs, your medical history, any potential side effects, and then determine the best medication and dosage for you.
Because what works for one person might not work for another, right?
Absolutely. And it often takes a bit of trial and error to find that sweet spot. The book encourages, open communication with your doctor. If you're experiencing any side effects, you don't think the meds are working, you have concerns, talk about it.
Right. Keep that dialogue open.
Exactly. Now, we've talked a lot about stimulants, but the book also discusses non-stimulant medications.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Things like Strattera and Wellbutrin. These work on different neurotransmitter systems.
So I'm guessing those might be an option for people who can't tolerate stimulants or have concerns about misuse?
Right. They tend to have a slower onset of action, though, so it might take a few weeks to really notice the effects.
Okay.
But they can still be super helpful. It really comes down to finding what works best for you. Speaking of personalized treatment, ADHD 2.0 also touches on those exciting advancements in genetic testing.
Right. That's where things get really interesting. Didn't we touch on that earlier?
We did. Remember how certain genes can influence how our bodies metabolize medication?
Yeah.
Well, by analyzing these genes, doctors can potentially predict how someone might respond to a particular drug, which means tailoring treatment to your unique genetic makeup.
It's like science fiction becoming reality.
It is. And while genetic testing for medication response is still relatively new, ADHD 2.0 presents it as this huge step towards more targeted treatment.
Wow, it's exciting to think about the possibilities. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've talked about, debunking myths, the complexities of the ADHD brain, the importance of a holistic approach. I mean, ADHD 2.0 offers a wealth of knowledge and hope.
I agree. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand ADHD on a deeper level.
And if there's one key takeaway I hope our listeners get from this, it's that ADHD isn't a life sentence. It's a different way of thinking, experiencing the world. And with the right knowledge, tools, and support, it can be a source of strength, creativity, resilience.
Beautifully said. ADHD 2.0 reminds us that it's about embracing neurodiversity, not forcing yourself to fit in.
Right. And we've seen how people with ADHD can thrive when they find their right difficult and create that environment that supports their unique needs and strengths.
Exactly. Whether you have ADHD, VAST, or just struggle with focus in today's world, there is hope. And there are strategies you can implement to navigate those challenges.
Absolutely. So we encourage everyone to check out ADHD 2.0 for themselves. It's full of insights and advice.
It is.
And as always, thanks for joining us on the Mad Genius Thesis.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep celebrating that amazing diversity of the human brain. All right, so as promised, let's unpack this whole topic of medication for ADHD. It can be a bit tricky, right?
It can be, yeah. Lots of questions and sometimes misinformation floating around.
Right, exactly. But before the break, we were talking about how ADHD 2.0 presents this really balanced perspective on medication.
Yeah.
It's not like this magic cure-all, but it can be a helpful tool as part of a bigger approach.
Exactly. It's got to be integrated with therapy, lifestyle changes, that supportive environment we talked about.
Right, right. So it's about tackling it from all sides, not just one thing.
Exactly. And for folks who are considering medication, the book does a good job of, kind of breaking down the types. Starting with the most common, which are stimulants.
Stimulants. I know some people hear that, they're like, wait, what?
I get it. It does seem counterintuitive at first, right?
Right.
Giving someone with an overactive brain a stimulant.
Right.
But the key thing to remember is that stimulants for ADHD, they work differently. They target specific neurotransmitters in the brain.
Dopamine and norepinephrine.
Exactly. Those are the ones involved in, attention, focus, executive function. And in people with ADHD, these systems are often not working as well as they could be.
Right.
So stimulants, they kind of give those systems a boost, leading to improvements in concentration, impulse control, all of that.
So it's not about making the brain more stimulated overall. It's more like fine-tuning those specific pathways.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the book actually lays out all the different stimulant medications that are out there. You've got the methylphenidate-based ones like Ritalin and Concerta, and then the amphetamine-based ones like Adderall and Vyvanse.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, which is why, working closely with a healthcare professional is so important.
Right, right. Someone who can really figure out what's right for you.
Exactly. They can look at your individual needs, your medical history, any potential side effects, and then help you figure out the right medication and dosage.
Because what works for one person might not work for another at all.
Exactly. It often takes some trial and error to get it just right. And the book really encourages open communication with your doctor. If you're having side effects, if you feel like it's not working, if you're worried about something, talk about it.
Don't just suffer in silence.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking a lot about stimulants, but there are other options too. The book also talks about non-stimulant medications.
Oh, like what?
Things like Strattera and Wellbutrin, they work on different neurotransmitter systems.
So I'm guessing those might be good for people who, can't tolerate stimulants or are worried about, like, potential for misuse.
Yeah, exactly. They do tend to have a slower onset of action, though, so it might take a few weeks to notice the full effects.
Okay.
But for some people, they're really helpful. Again, it's about finding what works for you.
Right. And speaking of finding what works for you, let's talk about genetic testing. That's pretty cutting-edge stuff.
It is, yeah. It's really exciting. It holds so much promise for the future of ADHD treatment.
Remember how we talked about how genes can affect how our bodies process medication?
Yeah.
Well, with genetic testing, doctors can actually analyze those genes and try to predict how someone might respond to a certain drug.
Right. Which means you can tailor treatment even more precisely.
It's amazing. It feels like sci-fi, but it's actually happening.
I know, right? And even though genetic testing for medication response is still fairly new, ADHD 2.0 presents it as this huge step towards, more effective and targeted treatment.
I think we've covered a ton today. We've debunked myths, explored how the ADHD brain works, talked about the power of this holistic approach. I mean, ADHD 2.0 is packed with knowledge and hope.
It really is. It's such a valuable resource for anyone who wants to learn more about ADHD.
And if our listeners take away one thing, I hope it's that ADHD is not a life sentence.
Absolutely.
It's a different way of thinking, a different way of experiencing the world. And with the right knowledge, the right tools, and the right support, it can be a source of amazing things. Strength, creativity, resilience.
Beautifully said. It's about embracing neurodiversity, not trying to fit into some mold.
Exactly. And we've seen how people with ADHD can truly thrive when they find their right difficult and create an environment that truly supports them.
Whether you have ADHD, VASD, or just find yourself struggling with focus in this crazy world, there's hope. And there are strategies that can help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So check out ADHD 2.0 for yourself. It's full of insights and practical advice.
It really is a great read.
As always, thank you for joining us on the Mad Genius Thesis.
Mm.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep celebrating the incredible diversity of the human brain.